The whispers had already begun before she even reached the altar. Lady Arabella Hartwell, daughter of a disgraced earl, walked down the aisle of St. George's Church in Hanover Square with her head held high, though her heart trembled with each step. The congregation's eyes bore into her like daggers, some pitying, most condemning. She was the sacrificial lamb offered up to salvage what remained of her family's tattered reputation after her brother's gambling debts had scandalized the ton. The groom, Lord Percival Ashford, heir to a viscountcy, waited at the altar with an expression of barely concealed disdain. But as the vicar opened his prayer book, the heavy oak doors burst open with a thunderous crack. A figure stood silhouetted against the morning light, his voice cutting through the stunned silence like a blade. "I object. Udi, if you're listening to this story, don't forget to click the like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments from which part of the world you're listening to this story. I want to know how far it has traveled." The morning of Arabella Hartwell's wedding began as all mornings had begun for the past 3 months, with a sense of inexorable doom settling over her like London fog. She sat before the vanity in her bedchamber at Hartwell House, watching her lady's maid, Margaret, arrange her dark auburn hair into an elaborate coiffure befitting a bride of the ton. The face that stared back at her from the mirror was pale, her green eyes shadowed with sleepless nights, though her features remained delicate and refined. The high cheekbones and graceful neck that had once made her the subject of admiring glances at Almack's now seemed merely ornamental, like a porcelain doll dressed for display. "You look beautiful, my lady," Margaret whispered, though her voice carried an undertone of sorrow that Arabella pretended not to hear. Beautiful. Yes, she supposed she was, in the way that a painting was beautiful, something to be admired from a distance but never truly known. At 22 years of age, Arabella had long understood that her beauty was not a gift, but a currency, one that her family had finally decided to spend in the most desperate of transactions. The wedding gown lay across her bed, a confection of ivory silk and Brussels lace that had cost more than her family could afford. It was a costume for a performance, and she was the lead actress in a tragedy not of her own making. Through the window, she could see the grey skies of London in the spring of 1818, the Regency era in full bloom with its rigid social hierarchies and unforgiving judgments. Somewhere beyond those windows, the ton was already gathering at St. George's Church, eager to witness the spectacle of the fallen Hartwell family's attempt at redemption. Her father, the Earl of Hartwell, had once been a respected member of Parliament, a man of principle and dignity. But that was before her younger brother Thomas had fallen into the clutches of professional gamblers and accumulated debts that threatened to destroy them all. £50,000, an astronomical sum that hung over their household like a guillotine blade. The creditors had been patient at first, then insistent, and finally threatening. Debtor's prison loomed for Thomas, and with it, complete social annihilation for the entire family. Lord Percival Ashford had appeared like a solution wrapped in expensive tailoring. The second son of Viscount Ashford, Percival had recently inherited a considerable fortune from a childless uncle, and with it, aspirations of climbing higher in society. He needed a wife with impeccable breeding and connections, even if her family's finances were in ruins. The Hartwells needed money and the protection of an alliance with a family whose reputation remained untarnished. It was a transaction, pure and simple, though everyone pretended it was something more. Arabella had met Percival only 4 times before their engagement was announced. He was handsome in a cold, classical way, tall and fair-haired, with pale blue eyes that seemed to look through her rather than at her. During their chaperoned meetings, he had spoken primarily of himself, his expectations for a wife, his plans for establishing himself in political circles, his requirements for the management of his household. She was to be ornamental, obedient, and above all grateful for his condescension in marrying beneath his newly elevated station. "Oh, you understand, Miss Hartwell," he had said during their third meeting, his tone that of a man explaining something to a slow child, "that this marriage is an act of considerable generosity on my part. Your family's recent difficulties make you a less than ideal match. However, I am willing to overlook these deficiencies in exchange for your family's ancient name and your own adequate accomplishments." Adequate. The word had stung more than she cared to admit. Arabella had been educated by an excellent governess, spoke French and Italian fluently, played the pianoforte with genuine skill, and had read more widely than most young ladies of her acquaintance. But to Percival, she was merely adequate, a serviceable acquisition like a well-bred horse or a competently painted landscape. She had wanted to refuse. Oh, how she had wanted to refuse. But then she had seen her mother's face, aged 10 years in as many months, and her father's stooped shoulders as he sat in his study surrounded by bills he could not pay. She had heard Thomas weeping in his room, terrified of the prison that awaited him, and she had understood that her desires, her dreams of marrying for affection and respect, were luxuries her family could no longer afford. "It will not be so terrible," her mother had said, taking Arabella's hands in her own trembling ones. "Many marriages begin as arrangements and grow into something more. Lord Percival is a gentleman. He will treat you with the respect due to his wife." But Arabella had seen the way Percival looked at her, or rather, the way he didn't look at her. To him, she was a problem solved, a box ticked on his list of requirements for advancement. There was no warmth in his gaze, no curiosity about her thoughts or feelings, no indication that he saw her as anything more than a particularly useful piece of furniture. The weeks leading up to the wedding had been a blur of preparations and mounting dread. The banns had been read at St. George's, the wedding breakfast planned, the guest list carefully curated to include those members of the ton whose attendance might help restore the Hartwell family's standing. Percival had been absent for most of it, claiming business in the country, though rumours had reached Arabella that he had been seen frequently in the company of Lady Charlotte Pemberton, a beautiful widow known for her sharp wit and sharper ambitions. When Arabella had tentatively mentioned these rumours to her father, he had dismissed them with a wave of his hand. Men of Lord Percival's station often maintain friendships with ladies of society. It is not your concern, Arabella. Your duty is to be a good wife, to manage his household, and to provide him with heirs. Nothing more. Nothing more. As if she were nothing more than a vessel for his ambitions, a womb to carry his children, a hostess to serve his guests. The romantic dreams she had harboured as a girl, of a husband who would value her mind, who would laugh with her, who would see her as a partner rather than a possession, had withered like flowers in winter. Margaret finished with her hair and helped her into the wedding gown. The silk whispered against her skin, cool and impersonal. The bodice fit perfectly, emphasizing her slender waist and the graceful line of her shoulders. The lace veil, held in place by a tiara that had belonged to her grandmother, cascaded down her back like a waterfall of gossamer. She looked every inch the beautiful bride, and she felt like a prisoner dressed for execution. A knock at the door announced her father's arrival. The Earl of Hartwell entered slowly, and Arabella's heart clenched at the sight of him. He had aged so much in recent months, his hair now more grey than brown, his face lined with worry and shame. But when he saw her, his eyes filled with tears. "My darling girl," he said, his voice breaking, "you look so like your mother did on our wedding day." Arabella went to him and he embraced her carefully, mindful of her elaborate dress. "Papa," she whispered, "I'm frightened." "I know," he said, stroking her hair as he had when she was a child. "I know, and I am so sorry, Arabella. If there were any other way—" "There isn't," she said firmly, pulling back to look at him. "We both know there isn't, and I will do my duty, Papa. I will make you proud. You have always made me proud," he said, cupping her face in his hands. "You are the best of us, Arabella. Never forget that. Whatever happens, you are strong and clever and good. Those qualities cannot be taken from you, no matter what circumstances you find yourself in. The carriage ride to St. George's Church was mercifully short. Arabella sat beside her father, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, watching the familiar streets of Mayfair pass by. The church, when they arrived, was already filled with members of the ton, their faces a blur of curiosity and judgment. She could hear the whispers as she entered on her father's arm, the rustle of silk and the murmur of speculation. Poor thing, sacrificed to save her wastrel brother. Ashford is getting a bargain, even if the family is ruined. She's lovely, but what good is beauty without fortune? Arabella kept her eyes fixed on the altar, where Percival stood waiting. He looked magnificent in his wedding attire, every inch the prosperous gentleman. But as she drew closer, she saw his expression, not joy, not even satisfaction, but a kind of cold triumph. This was his victory, his acquisition of a well-bred wife at a discount price. And beside him, in the front pew, sat Lady Charlotte Pemberton, her beautiful face arranged in an expression of sympathetic concern that didn't quite reach her calculating eyes. The vicar began the ceremony, his voice echoing through the vaulted space. Arabella heard the words as if from a great distance, her mind floating somewhere above her body, watching this scene play out like a theatrical performance. She made the required responses automatically, her voice steady despite the turmoil in her heart. And then, just as the vicar asked if anyone present knew of any impediment to this marriage, the great doors of the church burst open with a sound like thunder. The Duke of Ashbourne stood framed in the doorway of St. George's Church, and for a moment time itself seemed to suspend. Arabella had never seen him before, yet she knew instantly who he was. Everyone in London knew of the Duke of Ashbourne, though he rarely graced society with his presence. He was a man of perhaps 30 years, tall and powerfully built, with dark hair that fell carelessly across his forehead, and eyes of such piercing grey they seemed to see through pretense and artifice to the truth beneath. His clothing was impeccable but understated, the mark of a man who had no need to prove his status through ostentation. "I object," he repeated, his voice carrying effortlessly through the shocked silence. He strode down the aisle, with the confidence of a man who had never been denied anything, his boots echoing on the stone floor. "This marriage cannot proceed." The congregation erupted in gasps and frantic whispers. Arabella felt her father's hand tighten on her arm, felt her own heart hammering against her ribs. Percival's face had gone from pale to crimson, his jaw clenched with fury. "Your Grace," the vicar stammered, clearly at a loss for how to proceed. "This is most irregular. On what grounds do you object?" The Duke reached the altar and turned to face the assembled guests, his presence commanding every eye in the room. "On the grounds that Lord Percival Ashford is already married." The church exploded into chaos. Ladies shrieked, gentlemen shouted, and Percival's face drained of all colour. "That is a damned lie!" he roared, but his voice cracked with panic. "Is it?" The Duke's tone was conversational, almost pleasant, which somehow made his words more devastating. "Then perhaps you can explain the marriage certificate I have in my possession, dated 3 years ago, documenting your union to one Miss Eleanor Fitzroy in a church in Gretna Green." Arabella felt the world tilt beneath her feet. She gripped the altar rail to steady herself, her mind struggling to process what she was hearing. Married. Percival was already married. "Eleanor Fitzroy was a youthful indiscretion," Percival snarled, his composure crumbling. "A mistake. The marriage was never consummated, never recognized. A marriage is a marriage, Lord Percival, whether you choose to recognize it or not," the Duke interrupted, his voice hardening. "And Miss Fitzroy, now Mrs. Ashford, legally speaking, is very much alive and prepared to testify to the validity of your union. I have brought her to London for precisely that purpose." The Duke gestured toward the back of the church, where a small, frightened-looking young woman stood in the doorway, her plain dress and simple bonnet marking her as someone far below the social station of everyone present. She was perhaps 20 years old, with light brown hair and eyes red from crying. Percival's face twisted with rage and something else, fear. "You have no right to interfere in my affairs, Ashbourne. This is none of your concern." "On the contrary," the Duke said, his grey eyes fixing on Percival with an intensity that made the younger man step back. "When a man attempts to commit bigamy in order to acquire a fortune through fraudulent means, it becomes everyone's concern, particularly when the intended victim is an innocent young woman who deserves far better than to be trapped in an illegal marriage to a scoundrel." Arabella found her voice at last, though it emerged as barely more than a whisper. "Is this true? Were you truly going to marry me while already bound to another?" Percival turned to her, and for the first time she saw him clearly, not as the solution to her family's problems, but as the selfish, calculating man he truly was. "It was a mistake, a foolish elopement when I was young and stupid. Eleanor was a merchant's daughter, completely unsuitable. I hoped that if I simply ignored it, it would cease to matter." "Cease to matter?" Arabella's voice grew stronger, fueled by a rising tide of anger that burned away her shock. "You were going to make me your bigamous wife, to trap me in a false marriage, to use me for my family's name while keeping your legal wife hidden away like a shameful secret." "Your family needed this marriage," Percival shot back, his mask of civility completely shattered now. "Your brother's debts, your father's disgrace, you had no other options. You should be grateful I was willing to overlook your family's ruin and offer you my protection, even if the circumstances were complicated." The cruelty of his words, the casual dismissal of her worth, struck Arabella like a physical blow. But before she could respond, Lady Charlotte Pemberton rose from her pew, her beautiful face arranged in an expression of theatrical sympathy. "Oh, Percival," Charlotte said, her voice carrying to every corner of the church, "how could you have been so foolish? And poor Miss Hartwell, to be humiliated in such a public fashion. Though I suppose," she added with a delicate pause that was more damning than any direct accusation, "given her family's desperate circumstances, one can understand why she might have been willing to overlook certain irregularities in the arrangement." The implication was clear and devastating, that Arabella had known about the existing marriage and had been willing to participate in bigamy for the sake of her family's financial salvation. The whispers around them grew louder, more vicious. "That is absolutely false." Arabella's father stepped forward, his voice shaking with rage. "My daughter knew nothing of this deception. Lord Percival presented himself as an honourable gentleman, and we had no reason to doubt his word." "Of course you would say that, Hartwell," Charlotte continued, her tone dripping with false compassion. "But everyone knows how desperate your situation has become. £50,000 in debt, your son facing prison. One might do anything to escape such circumstances." Arabella felt the weight of hundreds of eyes upon her, felt the judgment and speculation pressing down like a physical force. This was worse than simply being jilted at the altar. She was being painted as a willing participant in fraud, a woman so desperate that she would knowingly enter into a bigamous marriage. Her reputation, already fragile due to her family's financial troubles, was being shredded before the entire ton. The Duke of Ashbourne's voice cut through the rising cacophony like a blade. "Lady Charlotte, I would advise you to choose your next words very carefully. Miss Hartwell is the victim here, not the perpetrator. Lord Percival deliberately concealed his existing marriage in order to acquire her family's connections and what remained of their fortune. To suggest otherwise is not only false but slanderous." Charlotte's eyes flashed with anger, but she had the sense to remain silent. The Duke turned to Arabella, and for the first time she met his gaze directly. What she saw there surprised her. Not pity, which she would have hated, but respect and something that looked almost like admiration. "Miss Hartwell," he said, his voice gentler now, "you have been grievously wronged. I apologize for the dramatic nature of this revelation, but I felt it necessary to prevent you from being trapped in a false marriage. No woman deserves such treatment. regardless of her family's circumstances. Arabella's mind was reeling, but she forced herself to maintain her composure. "How did you discover this, Your Grace? Why did you involve yourself in this matter?" A slight smile touched the Duke's lips. "I make it my business to know the character of men who move in society, Miss Hartwell. When I heard of Lord Percival's engagement to you, I found certain aspects of his history troubling. A few inquiries led me to Miss Fitzroy, who had been living in poverty in Scotland, abandoned by the man who had promised to love and protect her. I felt it my duty to bring the truth to light before another innocent woman was harmed. Percival, seeing his schemes collapsing around him, made one last desperate attempt to salvage the situation. This is absurd. Ashbourne has no proof, only the word of some merchant's daughter who probably fabricated this entire story for money. The marriage certificate is likely a forgery. The certificate has been examined by 3 separate solicitors, all of whom have verified its authenticity," the Duke said coldly. "And Miss Fitzroy's testimony is corroborated by the vicar who performed the ceremony, who is prepared to swear to its validity in court. You are legally married, Lord Percival, and any attempt to marry Miss Hartwell would constitute bigamy, a crime punishable by imprisonment." The full weight of scandal crashed down upon the church. Guests were already rising from their pews, eager to escape the scene and spread the gossip throughout London. Arabella stood frozen at the altar, her wedding gown suddenly feeling like a shroud, her carefully arranged future dissolving into chaos and shame. Her mother appeared at her side, tears streaming down her face. "Come, Arabella, we must leave. We must get you away from here." But where could they go? Arabella thought wildly. The wedding breakfast was cancelled, the alliance destroyed, and now, thanks to Charlotte's insinuations, her own reputation was in tatters. The Ton would feast on this scandal for months, and the Hartwell name, already damaged, would be completely destroyed. Thomas would still face debtor's prison, her father would be ruined, and she would be forever known as the girl who was almost married to a bigamist, with whispers following her that she had known and been complicit in the fraud. The Duke of Ashbourne stepped closer, his voice low enough that only Arabella and her parents could hear. "Lord Hartwell, Lady Hartwell, Miss Hartwell, I would like to speak with you privately. I believe I may have a solution to your difficulties, if you will permit me to call upon you this afternoon." Arabella's father looked at the Duke with a mixture of gratitude and suspicion. "Your Grace, you have already done us a great service by preventing this disastrous marriage. We could not possibly impose upon your generosity further." "It is no imposition," the Duke said firmly. "Please, allow me to call upon you at 4 o'clock. I believe we have much to discuss." Before her father could respond, Arabella found herself speaking. "Why?" she asked, her voice steady, despite the turmoil raging inside her. "Why would you help us, Your Grace? You don't know us. We have nothing to offer you." The Duke's grey eyes met hers, and she saw something in their depths that she couldn't quite name, something that made her breath catch in her throat. "Perhaps I simply believe that justice should be served, Miss Hartwell, and perhaps I see value where others see only difficulty." With that cryptic statement, he bowed and turned to leave, his presence commanding respect, even as the church emptied around them in a flurry of shocked whispers and avid speculation. Arabella watched him go, her mind spinning with questions and a strange, unfamiliar sensation that felt almost like hope. But as she turned to leave the church on her father's arm, still wearing her wedding gown, like a costume from a play that had ended in disaster, she caught sight of Charlotte Pemberton's face. The widow was smiling, a small, satisfied smile that promised this humiliation was far from over. The carriage ride back to Hartwell House was silent, except for her mother's quiet weeping. Arabella sat rigid and dry-eyed, her mind already working through the implications of what had just occurred. The scandal would be enormous. The Ton would dissect every moment of the scene at St. George's, would speculate endlessly about what she had known and when she had known it. Charlotte's insinuations would spread like wildfire, and there would be no way to prove her innocence beyond simply asserting it. And yet, beneath the shock and humiliation, Arabella felt something else stirring, a fierce, burning anger at Percival for his deception, at Charlotte for her cruelty, at the entire system that had made her a commodity to be traded for her family's salvation. She had been willing to sacrifice herself for duty, but she would not be made a scapegoat for another man's crimes. When they arrived home, the servants' faces were carefully blank, but Arabella could see the pity in their eyes. Margaret helped her out of the wedding gown with gentle hands, and Arabella stood in her chemise, staring at the elaborate dress that would never be worn again. "What will you do, my lady?" Margaret asked softly. Arabella turned to look at herself in the mirror. Her face was pale but composed, her green eyes bright with unshed tears and suppressed fury. "I don't know," she admitted, "but I will not let this destroy me. I will not let them win." At precisely 4 o'clock, the Duke of Ashbourne was announced. Arabella had changed into a simple afternoon dress of pale blue muslin, her hair arranged in a modest style. She descended the stairs to find her parents already in the drawing-room with their unexpected guest, who rose as she entered. "Miss Hartwell," he said, bowing, "thank you for receiving me." "Your Grace," she replied, curtsying. "My family and I are grateful for your intervention this morning, though I confess we are bewildered by your interest in our affairs." The Duke waited until she was seated before resuming his own seat. "I will be direct, as I believe the situation calls for honesty rather than social niceties. Miss Hartwell, your family faces ruin. Your brother's debts remain unpaid, and today's scandal will make it nearly impossible for you to secure another advantageous marriage. The whispers have already begun. I heard them myself as I left the church, suggesting that you were complicit in Lord Percival's scheme." Arabella's hands clenched in her lap, but she kept her voice steady. "I am aware of our situation, Your Grace. You need not enumerate our difficulties." "I enumerate them," the Duke continued, "because I wish to offer a solution. Miss Hartwell, I would like to propose that you marry me instead." The silence that followed was absolute. Arabella stared at him, certain she had misheard. Her mother gasped, and her father half rose from his chair before sinking back down speechless. "I beg your pardon," Arabella finally managed. "I am proposing marriage," the Duke said calmly, as if he were discussing the weather. "I am in need of a wife, and you are in need of a husband who can protect you from scandal and provide for your family. It seems a practical arrangement." Arabella felt as though she had stepped into a dream, or perhaps a different nightmare, one that wore the mask of salvation. She studied the Duke's face, searching for signs of mockery or madness, but found only calm sincerity in those penetrating grey eyes. "Your Grace," her father said, his voice hoarse with emotion, "this is extraordinarily generous, but we could not possibly accept. You have already done so much, and to bind yourself to our family when we have nothing to offer. On the contrary, Lord Hartwell, you have a great deal to offer," the Duke interrupted. "Your family name is ancient and respected. Your daughter is intelligent and accomplished, and I find myself in need of a wife who possesses both dignity and resilience. Miss Hartwell demonstrated both qualities this morning under circumstances that would have shattered a lesser woman." Arabella found her voice at last. "Forgive me, Your Grace, but I must ask, why? You are a duke, wealthy and powerful, with your choice of any woman in England. Why would you offer marriage to someone you met only hours ago, whose family is mired in scandal and debt?" The Duke leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "A fair question, and one that deserves an honest answer. I'm 32 years old, Miss Hartwell, and I have spent the last decade managing my estates and avoiding the marriage mart. My mother died 5 years ago, and since then I've had no one to manage my household or serve as hostess for the social obligations that come with my position. I need a duchess, but I have no patience for the simpering debutantes and ambitious mamas who populate society's ballrooms." He paused, his gaze holding hers. This morning, I watched you stand at that altar with grace and courage, even as your world collapsed around you. I watched you maintain your composure when that vicious woman tried to paint you as complicit in fraud. You did not weep or faint or create a scene. You faced disaster with dignity. That is the quality I seek in a wife. But you don't know me, Arabella protested, even as a traitorous part of her mind whispered that this might be her salvation. I could be terrible. I could be cruel or stupid or... I have made inquiries, the Duke said simply. You are known to be kind to your servants, devoted to your family, well-read and thoughtful. Your former governess, Miss Pemberton, no relation to Lady Charlotte, I assure you, spoke very highly of your character and intellect. You speak 3 languages, play the pianoforte beautifully, and have a particular interest in history and literature. These are not the accomplishments of a cruel or stupid woman. Arabella felt heat rise to her cheeks. You investigated me. I investigate everyone of interest to me, the Duke replied without apology. It is how I discovered Lord Percival's secret marriage. I make it my business to know the truth about people, Miss Hartwell. It has served me well. Her mother, who had been sitting in stunned silence, finally spoke. Your Grace, even if we were to consider such an offer, and it is overwhelmingly generous, the scandal from this morning will cling to Arabella. To marry her now would be to invite gossip and speculation about your own motives. Let them speculate, the Duke said, with a dismissive wave of his hand. I care nothing for the opinions of the ton. My position is unassailable, and as my Duchess, Miss Hartwell would be similarly protected. Anyone who dared to whisper against her would find themselves excluded from my homes and my influence, which extends considerably throughout England. Arabella's mind was racing. This was madness, absolute madness, and yet what choice did she have? This morning she had been prepared to marry a man she barely knew out of duty to her family. At least the Duke of Ashbourne had shown her kindness and respect, had saved her from a fraudulent marriage, and was offering her a position of genuine power and protection. I need time to think, she said finally. This is all so sudden, and I cannot make such a decision in the space of a few hours. Of course, the Duke said, rising. I would not expect otherwise. However, I must ask for your answer within 3 days. The scandal from this morning will spread quickly, and the longer we wait, the more damage will be done to your reputation. If we announce our engagement immediately and marry quickly, we can control the narrative. The ton will see it as a romantic rescue. The Duke who saved the innocent maiden from a scoundrel and claimed her for himself. He moved toward the door, then paused and turned back. Miss Hartwell, I want to be clear about what I am offering. This would be a marriage of convenience, at least initially. I would expect you to manage my household, serve as my hostess, and eventually provide an heir. In return, I would pay your brother's debts, restore your family's standing, and treat you with the respect and consideration due to my Duchess. I would not demand affection or love. Those things cannot be commanded. But I would offer you protection, security, and freedom to pursue your own interests within the bounds of propriety. After he left, Arabella sat in silence with her parents, the weight of the decision pressing down upon her. Her father looked 10 years older, torn between hope and guilt. Her mother wept quietly into her handkerchief. You don't have to do this, Arabella, her father said finally. We will find another way. I won't have you sacrifice yourself again. What other way, Papa? Arabella asked gently. Thomas still faces prison. Our creditors still demand payment. And now, thanks to Charlotte Pemberton's poison, I am tainted by association with Percival's crimes. No respectable man will offer for me now. The Duke is right. This may be my only chance. But to marry a stranger, I was prepared to marry Percival, who was also a stranger, Arabella pointed out. At least the Duke has shown himself to be honourable. He could have simply exposed Percival's bigamy and left us to face the consequences alone. Instead, He offers a solution that benefits us all." That night, Arabella lay awake in her bed, staring at the ceiling and trying to imagine her future. The Duke of Ashbourne. She didn't even know his given name. She knew only his reputation. A powerful man who shunned society, who managed his vast estates with legendary efficiency, who was respected and perhaps a little feared by his peers. He was said to be fair but exacting, generous to his tenants but intolerant of incompetence or dishonesty. And he wanted to marry her. The next morning brought a flood of calling cards and notes, though not the kind Arabella might have hoped for. Several of her former friends sent brief, cold messages expressing their concern and their regret that they would be unable to receive visitors for the foreseeable future. The meaning was clear. She was being cut, excluded from polite society, marked as tainted by scandal. But there was one note that surprised her. It was from a Lady Beatrice Ashbourne, written in an elegant, flowing hand. "My dear Miss Hartwell, I am the Duke of Ashbourne's aunt, and I have heard of yesterday's distressing events. My nephew has informed me of his intention to offer for your hand, and I write to extend an invitation for you to visit me at my home in Bloomsbury this afternoon, if you are willing. I believe we have much to discuss, and I would very much like to make your acquaintance before you make your decision. I remain, with warmest regards." Lady Beatrice Ashbourne. Arabella showed the note to her mother, who looked both hopeful and anxious. "Lady Beatrice is well respected in society," her mother said. "She is a widow, quite independent, known for her intelligence and her charitable works. If she supports the match, it would go a long way towards silencing the gossips." That afternoon, Arabella found herself in a comfortable drawing room in Bloomsbury, facing a woman of perhaps 55 years, with silver hair, keen blue eyes, and a warm smile that immediately put her at ease. Lady Beatrice was dressed elegantly, but not ostentatiously, and her home was filled with books, paintings, and an atmosphere of cultured refinement. "My dear Miss Hartwell," Lady Beatrice said, taking Arabella's hands in her own, "what a dreadful ordeal you have endured. Please sit down. I've ordered tea, and I promise you that anything we discuss will remain in complete confidence." As they settled into comfortable chairs, Arabella felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. There was something about Lady Beatrice that reminded her of her old governess, a combination of warmth and wisdom that invited trust. "My nephew tells me he has proposed marriage," Lady Beatrice said without preamble, "and I imagine you are quite bewildered by the entire situation." That is an understatement, Lady Beatrice," Arabella admitted. "I don't understand why the Duke would involve himself in my affairs, much less offer marriage. Surely there must be dozens of suitable young ladies who would be thrilled to become his Duchess." Lady Beatrice smiled. "Dozens, certainly. Suitable? That is another matter entirely. My nephew is a complicated man, Miss Hartwell. He is brilliant, principled, and utterly uninterested in the frivolous games of the tongue. His parents' marriage was a love match, you see, and he watched his father nearly destroy himself with grief when his mother died. I think William, that is the Duke's given name, William, decided then that love was too dangerous, too painful. He has avoided emotional entanglements ever since." "Then why marry at all?" Arabella asked. "Because he needs an heir, and because his estates require a mistress," Lady Beatrice replied. "But more than that, I think he is lonely, though he would never admit it. He has isolated himself in his work, in the management of his properties, and he has forgotten how to simply live. When he told me about you, about your courage and dignity in the face of humiliation, I heard something in his voice I haven't heard in years. Interest, respect, perhaps even admiration." Arabella felt her cheeks warm. "He doesn't know me, Lady Beatrice. How can he admire someone he's only just met?" "Sometimes we recognize kindred spirits instantly," Lady Beatrice said gently. "William saw in you someone who understands duty and sacrifice, who faces adversity with grace. These are qualities he values above all others, and I suspect he also saw someone who, like himself, has been forced to suppress her own desires for the sake of others. The older woman leaned forward, her expression serious. I will be frank with you, Miss Hartwell. If you marry my nephew, you will be entering a marriage without romantic love. William will be kind to you, respectful, generous, but he will not offer you his heart. He locked that away when his mother died, and I don't know if he will ever open it again. You must decide if you can accept that. Arabella thought of Percival, who had offered her nothing but cold calculation and hidden betrayal. At least the Duke was honest about what he could and couldn't give. And what would I gain, Lady Beatrice, besides security and position? Freedom, Lady Beatrice said simply. As the Duchess of Ashbourne, you would have considerable independence. William's estates are vast, and he would expect you to manage the household and social obligations, but beyond that, he would not restrict your activities. You could pursue your interests, your education, your charitable works. You would have your own income, your own sphere of influence. Many women in society are prisoners in their marriages, Miss Hartwell. As William's Duchess, you would be anything but. The tea arrived, and they spoke for another hour about the Duke's character, his habits, his expectations. Lady Beatrice painted a picture of a man who was demanding but fair, who valued competence and intelligence, who could be surprisingly kind when he chose to be. She also warned Arabella that he could be distant, absorbed in his work, sometimes forgetting that others needed more than material comfort. He is not an easy man, Lady Beatrice concluded, but he is a good one. And I think, Miss Hartwell, that you might be exactly what he needs, even if he doesn't realize it yet. As Arabella prepared to leave, Lady Beatrice took her hand once more. Whatever you decide, my dear, know that you have my support. And if you do choose to marry William, know that you will have an ally in me. I have longed for years to see my nephew truly happy, and I think you might be the one to teach him how to live again. The carriage ride home gave Arabella time to think. She had gone to Lady Beatrice's home, expecting to find reasons to refuse the Duke's offer. Instead, she had found reasons to accept it. The Duke, William, was not offering her love, but he was offering her respect, freedom, and the chance to be something more than a decorative wife. He was offering her the opportunity to matter, to have influence and purpose. That evening, a note arrived from an unexpected source. It was from Miss Eleanor Fitzroy, or rather Mrs. Percival Ashford, as she was legally known. The handwriting was uncertain, the paper cheap, but the words were heartfelt. Dear Miss Hartwell, I hope you will forgive my presumption in writing to you. The Duke of Ashbourne has been very kind to me, and he suggested that I might wish to express my gratitude to you for your grace yesterday. I am so sorry that my existence caused you such distress. I never meant to harm anyone. Lord Percival promised me the world when I was 17 and foolish, and then he abandoned me when he realized I could not advance his ambitions. The Duke has secured me a position as a governess with a respectable family in Yorkshire. Far from London and the scandal, he has given me a chance to start anew, and I understand he did so partly because he wished to protect you from a terrible fate. You are very fortunate to have such a champion, Miss Hartwell. I hope you will find the happiness that I was denied. With sincere wishes for your future, Eleanor Fitzroy. Arabella read the letter twice, her throat tight with emotion. The Duke had not only exposed Percival's bigamy, he had also ensured that Eleanor, the true victim in all of this, would have a chance at a decent life. This was not the action of a cold, calculating man. This was the action of someone who genuinely cared about justice and protecting the vulnerable. On the third day, as the Duke had requested, Arabella sent word that she would receive him that afternoon. When he arrived, she met him in the drawing room, her decision made. "Your Grace," she said, standing to greet him, "I have considered your proposal carefully, and I have questions before I give you my answer." "Of course," he said, his grey eyes attentive. "Ask me anything. If I marry you, will you expect me to love you?" The question seemed to surprise him, but he answered honestly, "No, I would hope for respect, companionship and partnership, but love, romantic love, is not something I require or even desire. Will you take mistresses? His jaw tightened slightly. I will not. I would expect fidelity from you, and I would offer the same in return. Whatever else our marriage may be, it will be honorable. Will you allow me to continue my education, to read, to study, to engage with ideas? A slight smile touched his lips. I would encourage it. I have one of the finest libraries in England, Miss Hartwell, and it would please me to know it was being used by someone who appreciates it. Arabella took a deep breath. Then, Your Grace, I accept your proposal. I will marry you. Something flickered in his eyes, relief, perhaps, or satisfaction. He crossed the room and took her hand, raising it to his lips in a gesture that was both formal and oddly intimate. You honor me, Miss Hartwell. I promise you will not regret this decision. I hope you won't regret it either, Your Grace, she said softly. William, he corrected. If we are to be married, you should call me William, at least in private. William, she repeated, testing the name on her tongue. And you must call me Arabella. Arabella, he said, and the way he spoke her name sent an unexpected shiver down her spine. We will be married by special license in 3 days' time. A small ceremony, just family and close friends. And then we will leave London for my estate in Derbyshire. I think you will appreciate the peace and quiet after the chaos of recent days. The announcement of their engagement appeared in the newspapers the following morning, and London society erupted in speculation. The Duke of Ashbourne, who had shunned the marriage mart for years, was marrying the girl who had been jilted at the altar, or rather, saved from a bigamous marriage. The romantic narrative that William had predicted began to take shape, the noble Duke rescuing the innocent maiden from a scoundrel, but not everyone was pleased by the news. Lady Charlotte Pemberton, upon reading the announcement, threw her teacup across her drawing room in a fit of rage. She had expected Arabella to be ruined, to slink away from London in disgrace. Instead, the girl was becoming a duchess, rising to a position far above Charlotte's own. It was intolerable. The wedding took place in the Duke's private chapel at Ashbourne House, his London residence. Arabella wore a simple gown of cream silk, far less elaborate than the wedding dress that had been meant for Percival. Lady Beatrice stood beside her as a witness, offering encouraging smiles throughout the brief ceremony. Thomas was there, looking both grateful and guilty, and her parents wept tears that seemed equal parts joy and sorrow. When William placed the ring on her finger, a magnificent emerald surrounded by diamonds, and spoke his vows in that deep, steady voice, Arabella felt the full weight of what she had done. She was a duchess now, bound to a man she barely knew, embarking on a life she could not have imagined mere days ago. But as they left the chapel together, William's hand warm and steady beneath her own, she felt something she had not felt in months. Hope. Perhaps this marriage would never be a love match. Perhaps William would never open his heart to her, but he had given her respect, protection, and the promise of freedom. For now, that was enough. The journey to Derbyshire took 2 days, and Arabella spent much of it gazing out the carriage window, watching London fade behind her. William sat across from her, occasionally pointing out landmarks or estates, but mostly allowing her to process everything in silence. She appreciated his restraint, his understanding that she needed time to adjust to her new reality. When they finally arrived at Ashbourne Park, Arabella's breath caught in her throat. The estate was magnificent, a sprawling Palladian mansion set in hundreds of acres of parkland, with formal gardens, a lake, and rolling hills stretching to the horizon. It was beautiful, imposing, and utterly unlike anything she had ever called home. "Welcome to Ashbourne Park," William said, helping her down from the carriage. "Your new home, Arabella. I hope you will be happy here." As she stood before the grand entrance, surrounded by servants who had lined up to greet their new Duchess, Arabella felt the final pieces of her old life falling away. She was no longer Miss Arabella Hartwell, the sacrificial bride offered up to save her family. She was the Duchess of Ashbourne, and her new life was just beginning. The first weeks at Ashbourne Park passed in a blur of activity and discovery. Arabella threw herself into learning the intricacies of managing a ducal household, and she found, to her surprise, that she possessed a natural aptitude for it. The housekeeper, Mrs. Thornton, a stern but fair woman of 60 years, initially regarded her new mistress with skepticism. After all, the Duchess was young and had arrived under scandalous circumstances. But Arabella's genuine interest in the welfare of the servants, her quick mind for household accounts, and her respectful manner soon won the older woman's loyalty. "Your Grace has a gift for this," Mrs. Thornton said one morning as they reviewed the weekly menus together. "Many young ladies of quality consider household management beneath them, but you understand that a well-run estate is the foundation of everything." William, too, seemed pleased with her adaptation to her new role. He spent most of his days in his study, managing his various estates and business interests, but he made a point of dining with Arabella each evening. Their conversations were initially formal, cautious, but gradually they began to find common ground. They discovered a shared love of history, a mutual appreciation for well-crafted arguments, and a similar dry sense of humor that occasionally surprised them both into laughter. One evening, as they sat in the library after dinner, William looked up from his correspondence to find Arabella absorbed in a thick volume of Roman history, her brow furrowed in concentration. "What has captured your attention so thoroughly?" he asked. She glanced up, a slight flush coloring her cheeks. "I'm reading about the Emperor Hadrian and his travels throughout the empire. I've always been fascinated by how he sought to understand the diverse peoples under his rule, rather than simply imposing Roman culture upon them. It seems a wise approach to governance." William set down his papers, his grey eyes intent upon her. "You think a ruler should adapt to his subjects, rather than demanding they adapt to him?" "Not entirely," Arabella said thoughtfully, "but I think there must be a balance. Understanding and respect must flow in both directions, or resentment builds until the entire structure collapses. The Roman Empire lasted as long as it did partly because it was flexible enough to incorporate different traditions and perspectives." "An interesting parallel to marriage, perhaps," William said quietly. Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them. An acknowledgement that they, too, were learning to balance their different perspectives, to build something stable from an arrangement that had begun in chaos and necessity. But their peaceful interlude in Derbyshire could not last forever. 6 weeks after their wedding, a letter arrived from Lady Beatrice, written in her characteristic flowing hand. "My dear William and Arabella, I hope this letter finds you both well, and that Derbyshire is providing the respite you need. However, I must inform you that the gossip in London has not subsided as we might have hoped. Lady Charlotte Pemberton has been quite active in spreading rumours about the circumstances of your marriage, suggesting everything from a prior secret understanding between you and Arabella to the possibility that the entire scandal with Lord Percival was orchestrated to trap you into marriage. The whispers are growing louder, and I fear that if you do not return to London soon and present a united front, the damage to Arabella's reputation, and by extension to the Ashbourne name, may become permanent. The season is in full swing, and your absence is being interpreted as confirmation that there is something shameful to hide. I suggest you return for the Duchess of Marlborough's ball next month. It is the most significant event of the season, and your attendance would make a powerful statement. Arabella must be seen as your Duchess, confident and secure in her position, not as a woman hiding in the country from scandal. With love and concern, Aunt Beatrice Arabella read the letter with a sinking heart. She had been so grateful for the peace of Ashbourne Park, for the chance to establish herself as William's wife, away from the judgmental eyes of the ton. The thought of returning to London, of facing Charlotte Pemberton and all those who had witnessed her humiliation at St. George's, filled her with dread. William, however, seemed energized by the challenge. "Aunt Beatrice is right," he said, his jaw set with determination. We cannot hide here forever. If we are to silence the gossips, we must face them directly. And we must show them that you are not some desperate girl who trapped me into marriage, but my chosen Duchess, worthy of respect and admiration." "But how?" Arabella asked, her voice small. "Charlotte has had weeks to poison minds against me. Half of London probably believes I was complicit in some scheme. Then we will show them the truth," William interrupted, taking her hands in his. "Arabella, you are intelligent, accomplished, and gracious. When society sees you as my Duchess, confident, poised, and clearly valued by me, the gossip will lose its power. But you must believe in yourself. You must walk into that ballroom as though you have every right to be there, because you do." His faith in her was both touching and terrifying. "I don't know if I can," she admitted. "You can," he said firmly. "You stood at that altar and faced public humiliation with more grace than most people could muster in a lifetime. You have managed this household brilliantly in a matter of weeks. You have earned your place as the Duchess of Ashbourne, and I will be beside you every step of the way to ensure that everyone knows it." They returned to London 3 weeks later, taking up residence at Ashbourne House in Mayfair. The house was even more magnificent than the Derbyshire estate. A grand townhouse with soaring ceilings, priceless artwork, and an atmosphere of understated wealth and power. Arabella felt dwarfed by it at first, but William's steady presence and Lady Beatrice's enthusiastic support helped her find her footing. Lady Beatrice arrived the day after they settled in, bringing with her a modiste and a clear plan of action. "You must have a new wardrobe," she declared, surveying Arabella with a critical but kind eye. "Nothing ostentatious, but everything must be of the finest quality and the latest fashion. You are a duchess now, and you must look the part." Over the next 2 weeks, Arabella was fitted for gowns, pelisses, and evening dresses in rich fabrics and jewel tones that complemented her auburn hair and green eyes. William presented her with the Ashbourne diamonds, a magnificent parure of necklace, earrings, and tiara that had belonged to his mother, and insisted she wear them to the Marlborough ball. "They suit you," he said, as he fastened the necklace around her throat the evening before the ball, his fingers warm against her skin. "My mother would have liked you, I think. She valued intelligence and courage above all else." Arabella met his eyes in the mirror, seeing something in their grey depths that made her heart beat faster. "I wish I could have known her." "So do I," he said softly, and for a moment his usual reserve cracked, revealing a glimpse of the grief he still carried. Then he stepped back, his expression once again composed. "Tomorrow night, Arabella, we make our statement to society. Are you ready?" "I will be," she said, with more confidence than she felt. The night of the Duchess of Marlborough's ball arrived with all the weight of a military campaign. Arabella dressed with meticulous care in a gown of deep emerald silk that brought out the colour of her eyes, the Ashbourne diamonds glittering at her throat and in her hair. William, in his formal evening attire, looked every inch the powerful Duke, and when he offered her his arm, she felt a surge of gratitude for his solid, reassuring presence. The ballroom at Marlborough House was ablaze with candlelight, filled with the cream of London society. As the Duke and Duchess of Ashbourne were announced, a hush fell over the crowd. Arabella felt hundreds of eyes upon her, felt the weight of speculation and judgment, but she kept her head high and her expression serene, just as William had taught her. They descended the grand staircase together, and Arabella was acutely aware of the whispers that followed in their wake, but she also noticed something else, the way people stepped aside to let them pass, the respectful bows and curtsies, the acknowledgement of William's power and position. As his Duchess, she was afforded that same respect, whether the ton liked it or not. Lady Beatrice appeared at their side almost immediately, resplendent in purple silk. "You look magnificent, my dear," she said to Arabella, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "That gown is perfection, and the Ashbourne diamonds have never looked better. William, you must be very proud of your Duchess." "I am," William said, his voice carrying clearly. Arabella has exceeded every expectation. Ashbourne Park has never been better managed, and I count myself fortunate to have such an accomplished and intelligent wife." The public declaration of his satisfaction sent ripples through the crowd. This was not the behavior of a man who had been trapped into an unwanted marriage. This was a husband expressing genuine pride in his wife. They moved through the ballroom, William introducing Arabella to various members of the ton with a proprietary air that left no doubt about her status. The Duchess of Marlborough herself, a formidable woman in her 60s, greeted them warmly. "My dear Duchess of Ashbourne," she said, taking Arabella's hands, "how delightful to finally meet you properly. I have heard such wonderful things about your management of Ashbourne Park. Mrs. Thornton wrote to my own housekeeper, singing your praises. Quite unprecedented, I assure you. The woman is notoriously difficult to impress." Arabella felt a rush of warmth toward the unknown Mrs. Thornton, who had apparently been working behind the scenes to support her new mistress. "Your Grace is too kind. I have been blessed with excellent staff who have made my transition to my new role much easier than it might have been." "Gracious and modest," the Duchess of Marlborough said approvingly. "Ashbourne, you have chosen well." But not everyone was so welcoming. As they moved through the crowd, Arabella caught sight of Lady Charlotte Pemberton holding court near the refreshment tables, surrounded by a group of fashionable young women and gentlemen. Charlotte looked stunning in a gown of crimson silk that clung to her curves, her dark hair arranged in elaborate curls. When her eyes met Arabella's, they glittered with malice. "Ah, the Duke and Duchess of Ashbourne," Charlotte said, her voice carrying across the immediate vicinity. "How brave of you to venture back into society, Your Grace. I imagine it must be quite daunting after such a dramatic introduction to married life." William's hand tightened on Arabella's arm, but his voice remained cool and controlled. "Lady Charlotte, I trust you are well?" "Quite well, thank you," Charlotte replied, her smile sharp as a blade. "Though I confess I have been concerned about dear Miss Hartwell, forgive me, the Duchess of Ashbourne. It must be so difficult to hold one's head up after being jilted at the altar, even if one did manage to secure a duke in the aftermath. Some might say it was all rather convenient." The implication was clear and insulting. Several people nearby gasped, and Arabella felt her cheeks burn, but before William could respond, she found her own voice, steady and clear. "How kind of you to be concerned, Lady Charlotte," Arabella said, her tone pleasant, but with an edge of steel beneath it. "Though I must correct your characterization of events, I was not jilted. I was saved from entering into a bigamous marriage by my husband's timely intervention. As for convenience, I would say it was rather more a matter of justice and good fortune. The Duke recognized that I had been grievously wronged and offered me the protection of his name and position. I consider myself extraordinarily fortunate, not merely convenient." Charlotte's eyes narrowed. How romantic! Though one does wonder what the Duke saw in a girl whose family was so desperate that they were willing to marry her off to anyone who could pay their debts. £50,000 is quite a sum, is it not? The cruelty of the attack took Arabella's breath away, but William stepped forward, his voice dropping to a tone that was all the more dangerous for its quietness. "Lady Charlotte, you will cease this line of conversation immediately. My wife's family faced financial difficulties through no fault of their own, and they handled those difficulties with dignity and honour. The same cannot be said for Lord Percival Ashford, who attempted to commit bigamy and fraud. If you continue to spread malicious gossip about the Duchess of Ashbourne, you will find yourself unwelcome in any home that values my friendship or patronage. Do I make myself clear?" The threat was unmistakable, and Charlotte paled slightly, but she rallied quickly, her smile brittle. "Of course, Your Grace, I meant no offence. I was merely expressing concern for an old acquaintance." "The Duchess of Ashbourne has no need of your concern," William said coldly. "Come, Arabella. I believe the dancing is about to begin." He led her away, and Arabella was grateful for his support, though she felt shaken by the encounter. They had barely reached the edge of the dance floor when a new voice interrupted them. "Your Grace, Duchess, good evening." Arabella turned to find herself face to face with a gentleman she had not met before. He was perhaps 28 years old, with light brown hair, warm hazel eyes, and an open, friendly expression that was a stark contrast to Charlotte's venom. He was handsome in an understated way, and there was something about his manner that immediately put her at ease. "Lord Ashford," William said, and Arabella felt him tense beside her. "I did not expect to see you here. I arrived in London only yesterday," the gentleman replied. "I felt it was time I paid my respects to my cousin and his new bride. Duchess, allow me to introduce myself properly. I am Edmund Ashford, Viscount Ashford, no relation to the infamous Percival, I hasten to add. Our families share a name, but no blood connection, thankfully." Arabella curtsied, studying him with interest. "Lord Ashford, it is a pleasure to meet you." "The pleasure is entirely mine," Edmund said with a warm smile. "I have heard a great deal about you, Your Grace, and I must say that the reports do not do you justice. William is a fortunate man." There was genuine warmth in his voice, and Arabella found herself smiling in return. "You are too kind, Lord Ashford." "Edmund, please," he said. "We are family now, after all. William and I grew up together. He is more brother to me than cousin. I hope we shall be friends as well, Duchess." "Arabella," she said impulsively, "and I would like that very much." William was watching this exchange with an expression Arabella couldn't quite read. "Edmund has been travelling on the continent for the past 2 years, he explained. "I did not know he had returned to England." "I came back as soon as I heard about your marriage," Edmund said. "I wanted to meet the woman who finally convinced my notoriously marriage-averse cousin to take a wife. Duchess, Arabella, would you do me the honour of the next dance? With your husband's permission, of course." William hesitated for just a moment, then nodded. "Of course. Arabella, I must speak with Lord Pemberton about some business matters. Edmund will take excellent care of you." As William moved away, Edmund offered Arabella his arm and led her onto the dance floor. The orchestra struck up a waltz, and he guided her into the steps with practiced ease. "You must forgive my cousin," Edmund said as they danced. "He can be rather protective, and he has been isolated for so long that he sometimes forgets how to navigate social situations with grace. But I assure you, beneath that stern exterior beats a genuinely good heart." "I am beginning to discover that," Arabella said, "though I confess your cousin remains something of a mystery to me. We have been married for 2 months, and I feel I am only just beginning to understand him." "William has always been guarded," Edmund said thoughtfully. "Even as a boy, he kept his feelings close, but when he cares for someone, he is fiercely loyal and protective. The fact that he married you at all, Arabella, speaks volumes. He could have simply exposed Percival Ashford's bigamy and left your family to manage the aftermath. Instead, he offered you his name and protection. That is not the action of a man acting purely from duty." Arabella felt her heart skip. "What do you mean?" Edmund smiled. "I mean that my cousin may not realize it yet, but I suspect he saw something in you that intrigued him, something beyond mere duty or convenience. William has never done anything impulsively in his life. The fact that he proposed to you within hours of your first meeting suggests that you made quite an impression." Before Arabella could respond, the dance ended, and Edmund returned her to William's side with a bow. "Thank you for the dance, Arabella. William, you must bring your Duchess to visit me at Ashford Manor. I'm hosting a small gathering next week. Nothing too formal, just a few close friends. I think Arabella would enjoy meeting some people outside the usual ton circles." "We shall see," William said non-committally, but Arabella noticed that his eyes followed Edmund as the younger man moved away through the crowd. "He seems very kind," Arabella ventured. "He is," William agreed. "Edmund is one of the few people in society whose friendship I genuinely value. He has always been more comfortable with people than I am, more able to navigate the social world with ease. Sometimes I envy him that gift." The admission surprised Arabella. It was rare for William to reveal anything about his inner thoughts or feelings. Before she could respond, however, they were approached by a succession of guests, all eager to meet the new Duchess of Ashbourne and curry favour with the Duke. Arabella found herself answering questions about Ashbourne Park, accepting compliments on her gown, and engaging in the sort of polite small talk that was the currency of the ton. She was exhausted by the time they finally returned home in the early hours of the morning, but she also felt a sense of triumph. They had faced down Charlotte Pemberton's malice, had presented a united front to society, and had demonstrated that Arabella was not some desperate girl to be pitied, but a duchess to be respected. As William helped her down from the carriage, he said quietly, "You were magnificent tonight, Arabella. You handled Charlotte's venom with grace and dignity, and you charmed everyone you spoke with. I was proud to have you at my side." The warmth in his voice made Arabella's breath catch. "Thank you, William. I could not have done it without your support." He raised her hand to his lips, his grey eyes holding hers in the lamplight. "We make a good team, I think. Perhaps this marriage of convenience is not such a terrible arrangement after all." "Perhaps not," Arabella agreed softly, and as they entered Ashbourne House together, she felt something shift between them, something fragile and new, like the first green shoots of spring pushing through winter soil. But in her drawing room across Mayfair, Lady Charlotte Pemberton sat alone, staring into the dying embers of her fire. The evening had not gone as she had planned. Instead of seeing Arabella humiliated and diminished, she had watched the girl, no, the Duchess, shine with confidence and grace. And worse, she had seen the way the Duke looked at his wife, with a respect and admiration that Charlotte had never inspired in any man. It was intolerable. Arabella Hartwell had been meant to fade into obscurity, ruined by scandal. Instead, she had risen to become one of the most powerful women in England. Charlotte's fingers clenched around her wineglass as a cold determination settled over her. This was not over. Not by a long measure. If Arabella thought she had won, she was very much mistaken. The weeks following the Marlborough Ball brought a subtle but unmistakable shift in Arabella's position within London society. Invitations flooded into Ashbourne House, not the tentative, curious sort that had arrived immediately after her marriage, but genuine requests for her presence at dinners, musicales, and garden parties. The Duchess of Ashbourne, it seemed, had passed some invisible test, and the ton was now eager to claim her as one of their own. William observed this transformation with quiet satisfaction. He had always known that Arabella possessed the qualities necessary to succeed in her role, but watching her navigate the treacherous waters of high society with increasing confidence filled him with an emotion he was reluctant to name. It was more than pride, more than satisfaction. It was something warmer, something that made him seek out her company, even when duty did not require it. They fell into a comfortable routine. Mornings were spent separately, William in his study attending to business, Arabella managing the household or receiving callers, but afternoons often found them together in the library, reading in companionable silence or discussing the books they had discovered. Evenings were reserved for social obligations or quiet dinners at home, followed by more time in the library or the music room, where Arabella would play the pianoforte while William listened, his correspondence forgotten. One afternoon, as they sat together reviewing invitations, Arabella looked up from a particularly ornate card. "Lord Edmund has invited us to his gathering at Ashford Manor this weekend. He mentions it will be a small party, no more than 20 guests, focused on intellectual conversation and artistic pursuits rather than the usual society entertainments. May we accept?" William studied her face, noting the genuine interest in her eyes. "You wish to go?" "I do," she admitted. "Edmund seems to gather around him people of substance, writers, artists, reformers. It would be refreshing to engage in conversations about ideas rather than gossip and fashion, though if you would prefer not to—" "We shall go," William decided. "Edmund's gatherings are always stimulating, and I think you will enjoy meeting his circle. They are unconventional but brilliant, much like Edmund himself." Arabella's smile was radiant, and William felt that unfamiliar warmth spread through his chest again. He was beginning to realize that making her happy had become important to him, more important than he had anticipated when he had proposed this marriage of convenience. The journey to Ashford Manor in Hertfordshire took only a few hours, and they arrived on a golden Friday afternoon in late June. Edmund's estate was smaller than Ashbourne Park, but no less beautiful, with gardens that seemed to blend seamlessly into the surrounding countryside and a house that felt welcoming rather than imposing. Edmund greeted them personally, his warm smile genuine. "William, Arabella, I'm delighted you could come. Let me show you to your rooms, and then I'll introduce you to the other guests. I think you'll find them fascinating." He was not wrong. Over dinner that evening, Arabella found herself seated between a celebrated poet and a lady who had recently published a treatise on educational reform. The conversation ranged from literature to politics to philosophy, and for the first time since her marriage, Arabella felt free to express her own opinions without fear of being thought too intellectual or unfeminine. "You have a remarkable mind, Your Grace," the poet, Mr. Hartley, said as they discussed the merits of different historical periods. "It's rare to find someone who can engage with ideas so thoughtfully. The Duke is a fortunate man." Across the table, William was deep in conversation with a gentleman who had recently returned from India, but Arabella noticed that his eyes kept drifting toward her, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. When their gazes met, something passed between them, a shared moment of connection that made her heart flutter unexpectedly. After dinner, the guests gathered in the drawing room, where a young woman with striking features and an air of quiet intensity was persuaded to play the pianoforte. Her name was Miss Sophia Blackwood, and she was, Edmund explained, a composer of considerable talent, despite her youth and gender making it difficult for her to have her work performed publicly. As Miss Blackwood's fingers flew over the keys, creating music of haunting beauty, Arabella felt tears prick her eyes. There was such passion in the performance, such raw emotion, and it reminded her of all the dreams she had once harbored, dreams of a life filled with meaning and purpose beyond the narrow confines society prescribed for women. When the music ended, Arabella found herself approaching Miss Blackwood. "That was extraordinary," she said sincerely. "Have you published any of your compositions?" Miss Blackwood's expression was both grateful and bitter. "I have tried, Your Grace, but publishers are reluctant to take on work by a female composer. They say the public won't accept it, that it's unseemly for a woman to aspire to such things. So my music remains largely unheard, except at gatherings like this, where Lord Edmund is kind enough to give me a platform." An idea began to form in Arabella's mind. What if you had a patron, Miss Blackwood? Someone with the social standing to insist that your work be taken seriously. The young woman's eyes widened. Your Grace, I couldn't possibly presume." "You're not presuming. I am offering," Arabella said firmly. "I would be honored to serve as your patron, Miss Blackwood. With the Ashbourne name behind you, publishers might be more willing to take a chance on your work. And I could host a musicale at Ashbourne House, where your compositions could be performed for an audience of influential people. Would you be amenable to such an arrangement?" Miss Blackwood's face transformed with hope and gratitude. "Your Grace, I don't know what to say. Yes, of course, yes. Thank you." William, who had been observing this exchange from across the room, approached with Edmund at his side. "Arabella, what are you plotting?" he asked, though his tone was more amused than concerned. "I am going to be Miss Blackwood's patron," Arabella announced. "She is brilliantly talented, and it's absurd that her gender should prevent her work from being heard. With our support, she could have a real career as a composer." Edmund beamed. "Arabella, you are a woman after my own heart. I have been trying to convince William for years to use his influence to support artists and reformers. Perhaps you will succeed where I have failed." William looked at his wife with an expression that made her breath catch. Pride, certainly, but also something deeper, something that looked almost like wonder. If Arabella wishes to patron Miss Blackwood, then we shall do so. I trust her judgment in such matters. The simple statement of faith in her abilities meant more to Arabella than all the compliments she had received that evening. William was not merely allowing her to pursue this interest, he was actively supporting it, trusting her to make decisions that would reflect on the Ashbourne name. That night, as they prepared for bed in their adjoining chambers, William knocked softly on the connecting door. "May I come in?" Arabella, dressed in her nightgown with her hair loose around her shoulders, felt suddenly self-conscious. They had maintained separate bedrooms since their marriage, and William had never sought to change that arrangement. Of course. He entered still fully dressed, and stood awkwardly for a moment before speaking. "I wanted to tell you that I was impressed by what you did tonight with Miss Blackwood. You saw a need and moved immediately to address it. That is the mark of a true Duchess, someone who uses her position to make a difference, not merely to enjoy its privileges." I only did what seemed right," Arabella said softly. "Miss Blackwood's talent deserves to be recognized, and we have the power to help her. It would be wrong not to use that power." William moved closer, his grey eyes intense in the candlelight. "You are remarkable, Arabella. When I proposed to you, I thought I was offering you a practical arrangement. Security and position in exchange for managing my household and bearing my heirs. But you have become so much more than I anticipated. You have brought life back to Ashbourne Park, warmth to Ashbourne House, and purpose to a position that had become merely ceremonial. You have reminded me that privilege carries responsibility, and that responsibility can be a joy rather than a burden." Arabella's heart was pounding. "William, I know we agreed this would be a marriage of convenience," he continued, his voice rough with emotion. "I know I promised not to demand affection or love. But Arabella, I find myself hoping—" He broke off, seeming to struggle with words that did not come easily to him. "I find myself hoping that perhaps in time this marriage might become something more than mere convenience, that we might become true partners, not just in name but in heart." Arabella felt tears spring to her eyes. "I would like that very much, William. These past months I have come to admire you greatly, your integrity, your kindness, your quiet strength. You have given me so much more than security and position. You have given me freedom to be myself, to pursue my interests, to matter. I think I am beginning to care for you quite deeply." The smile that spread across William's face was like sunrise breaking through clouds. He reached out and gently cupped her cheek, his thumb brushing away a tear. "May I kiss you, Arabella? Not as a duty or an obligation, but because I very much want to." "Yes," she whispered. He leaned down slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, but she didn't. When his lips met hers, it was gentle and tentative at first, a question rather than a demand. But as Arabella responded, rising on her toes to deepen the kiss, it became something more, a promise, a beginning, a recognition of feelings that had been growing quietly between them for months. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathless. William rested his forehead against hers, his hands cradling her face. "I never expected this," he admitted. "I thought I'd locked my heart away so thoroughly that no one could reach it. But you, Arabella, you have found your way in without my even realizing it was happening." "And you have found your way into mine," she said softly. "I married you out of necessity, but I am staying out of choice. I choose you, William. I choose this life we are building together." He kissed her again, more confidently this time, and Arabella felt the last walls between them beginning to crumble. This was no longer a marriage of convenience. This was becoming something real, something precious, something worth fighting for. The weekend at Ashford Manor passed in a blur of stimulating conversation, beautiful music, and stolen moments between William and Arabella. They walked together in the gardens, their hands brushing and then clasping. They sat together during discussions, exchanging glances that spoke volumes. They were discovering each other anew, not as Duke and Duchess fulfilling roles, but as William and Arabella, two people falling genuinely in love. Edmund noticed the change and smiled knowingly. "I told you," he said to William on their last evening there. "I told you that Arabella was special. I'm glad you finally realized it yourself." "I am a fool for taking so long," William admitted. "But I intend to spend the rest of my life making up for lost time." Their return to London, however, brought an unwelcome reminder that not everyone was pleased by their happiness. A letter was waiting for them at Ashbourne House, written in an elegant hand that Arabella recognized immediately as Charlotte Pemberton's. "Dear Duchess of Ashbourne, I hope you enjoyed your little sojourn in the country. How cozy it must be to play at being a duchess while the rest of us remember the truth of your origins. I thought you might be interested to know that I have recently made the acquaintance of your brother Thomas. Such a charming young man. Though still plagued by his unfortunate gambling habits, he was at the tables just last night, in fact, accumulating new debts with alarming speed. It would be such a shame if word got out that the Duke of Ashbourne's brother-in-law was once again facing financial ruin. People might begin to wonder if your family has learned anything from their previous disgrace, or if they are simply using the Duke's generosity to fund their continued excesses. I'm sure you would wish to address this situation before it becomes public knowledge. With warmest regards, Charlotte Pemberton. Arabella felt the blood drain from her face. Thomas had promised, sworn, that he would never gamble again after William had paid his debts. But Charlotte's letter suggested otherwise, and Arabella knew the woman would not make such claims without evidence. William read the letter over her shoulder, his expression darkening. "This is blackmail," he said flatly. "Charlotte is threatening to spread gossip about Thomas unless—" "What? What does she want?" "I don't know," Arabella said, her voice shaking. "But William, if Thomas has truly been gambling again, if he's accumulated new debts, then we will deal with it," William said firmly. "Together, Arabella, you are not alone in this. Whatever your brother has done, we will face it as partners." But even as he spoke the words, Arabella felt a cold dread settling over her. She had thought the worst was behind them, that they had weathered the scandal and emerged stronger. But Charlotte Pemberton was not finished with her yet, and Thomas's weakness had provided the perfect weapon. The next morning, William insisted on accompanying Arabella to her family's home in Bloomsbury, where they had moved after the wedding to a modest but respectable house that William had purchased for them. Her father greeted them with obvious anxiety, and her mother's eyes were red from crying. "Thomas is upstairs," her father said heavily. "He's been there since last night, refusing to come down or speak to anyone. Arabella, I am so sorry. We hoped that he had learned his lesson, but the gambling is like a disease with him. He cannot seem to stop, no matter the consequences." Arabella climbed the stairs to her brother's room, William close behind her. She knocked firmly on the door. "Thomas, it's Arabella. Open the door. We need to talk." There was a long silence, then the sound of shuffling footsteps. The door opened to reveal Thomas, looking haggard and ashamed. He was only 20 years old, but he looked older, worn down by guilt and addiction. "Bella," he said, his voice breaking, "I'm so sorry I tried to stop. I swear I did, but how much?" William asked, his voice hard. "How much do you owe this time?" Thomas couldn't meet his eyes. £10,000, maybe more. I lost track." Arabella felt as though she'd been struck. £10,000, after everything they had been through, after all the sacrifices that had been made. "Thomas, how could you?" she whispered. "After everything. After I married to save you from debtor's prison, how could you do this again?" "I didn't mean to," Thomas said desperately. "It started with just one game, just one night, and then I thought I could win it back, and—" He broke off, tears streaming down his face. "I've ruined everything again, haven't I? I've destroyed you and Papa and Mama, and now I've brought shame on the Duke as well. I'm sorry, Bella. I'm so sorry." William stepped forward, his expression stern but not unkind. "Thomas, you have a sickness. Gambling is not merely a vice for you. It is an addiction that you cannot control on your own. I will pay your debts this one final time, but there will be conditions." Thomas looked up, hope and fear warring in his eyes. "Conditions? You will leave London immediately and go to my estate in Scotland," William said firmly. "There, you will work as an estate manager under my head steward, learning a trade and earning your keep. You will have no access to gambling establishments, no opportunity to fall back into old habits. If you work hard and prove yourself trustworthy, in time you may earn a position of real responsibility. But if you gamble again, if you betray this second chance, you will be on your own. I will not rescue you a third time. Do you understand?" Thomas nodded, his face crumpling. "Yes, Your Grace. Thank you. I don't deserve your kindness, but I swear I will not waste this opportunity. I will make you proud. I will make Bella proud." "See that you do," William said. "You leave for Scotland tomorrow morning. I will make the arrangements." As they left the house, Arabella felt emotionally exhausted. William handed her into their carriage and sat beside her, taking her hand in his. "Are you all right?" "I don't know," she admitted. "I'm angry at Thomas for his weakness, but I also pity him, and I'm grateful to you for giving him another chance, even though he doesn't deserve it." "I'm doing it for you, not for him," William said quietly. "You love your brother despite his flaws, and I will not be the cause of a permanent breach between you. But Arabella, you must understand, this is the last time. If Thomas fails again, he will face the consequences alone. I cannot continue to enable his self-destruction." "I understand," Arabella said, "and I agree. Thomas must learn to stand on his own, to face his demons and overcome them. We cannot save him from himself." But even as she spoke, she couldn't shake the feeling that Charlotte Pemberton's letter had been more than just information. It had been a warning shot. Charlotte had demonstrated that she could still hurt Arabella through her family, that the past was never truly past, and that scandal was always lurking just beneath the surface of their carefully constructed respectability. That evening, as they dressed for a dinner at the home of the Duke and Duchess of Devonshire, Arabella voiced her concerns. "William, I think Charlotte is planning something. The letter about Thomas felt like a test, a way of showing us that she still has power to harm us. I'm afraid of what she might do next." William finished tying his cravat and turned to face her, his expression serious. "Then we must be vigilant. But Arabella, you must also remember that we are not powerless. You are the Duchess of Ashbourne, with all the protection and influence that title confers. Charlotte Pemberton is a widow with no real power beyond her ability to spread gossip. As long as we present a united front, as long as we give her no ammunition to use against us, she cannot truly harm us." "I hope you're right," Arabella said, but she couldn't quite shake the sense of foreboding that had settled over her. The dinner at Devonshire House was a glittering affair, attended by the most influential members of the ton. Arabella found herself seated near the Duchess of Devonshire herself, a woman known for her political acumen and social influence. They spoke of Miss Blackwood and Arabella's plans to patron her work, and the Duchess expressed enthusiastic support. "We need more women like you, my dear," the Duchess said. "Women who use their positions to lift up other women, to create opportunities where none existed before. I would be delighted to attend your musicale and hear Miss Blackwood's compositions. With both our names attached to the event, it will be the talk of the season." Arabella felt a surge of excitement. This was what she had hoped for, the ability to make a real difference, to use her position for something meaningful. She glanced across the table at William, who was deep in conversation with the Duke of Devonshire, and felt a rush of affection for the man who had made all of this possible. But her contentment was shattered when, during a lull in the conversation, Lady Charlotte Pemberton's voice rang out from further down the table. "Your Grace," she said, addressing Arabella with false sweetness, "I understand your brother has left London rather suddenly. I do hope there's nothing wrong?" The table fell silent, all eyes turning to Arabella. She felt her heart begin to race, but she kept her expression calm and her voice steady. My brother has accepted a position managing one of my husband's estates in Scotland. It is an excellent opportunity for him to learn estate management and develop his skills. We are very proud of him." "How fortunate," Charlotte purred. "One might almost think the Duke was doing your family yet another favour, rescuing your brother from some difficulty, but of course that would be uncharitable of me to suggest." Before Arabella could respond, William's voice cut across the table like a blade. "Lady Charlotte, your insinuations are both tiresome and inappropriate. My brother-in-law is a young man of promise who is beginning his career in estate management. If you have nothing constructive to contribute to this conversation, I suggest you remain silent." The rebuke was public and devastating. Charlotte's face flushed with anger and humiliation, and several guests looked away in embarrassment. The Duchess of Devonshire smoothly changed the subject, but the damage had been done. Charlotte had been put in her place before the most influential members of society, and everyone present had witnessed it. As they left Devonshire House that evening, William took Arabella's hand. "I'm sorry you had to endure that. Charlotte is becoming increasingly desperate and reckless, but her behaviour tonight will have consequences. The Duchess of Devonshire does not tolerate such rudeness at her table, and Charlotte will find herself excluded from future invitations." "She's going to retaliate," Arabella said quietly. "She won't let this go." "Let her try," William said grimly. "We have weathered worse storms than Charlotte Pemberton, and we will weather this one too. Together, Arabella, always together." She leaned against him as their carriage rolled through the London streets, drawing strength from his solid presence. They had come so far from that disastrous morning at St. George's Church. They had built something real and precious from the ruins of scandal and necessity. And whatever Charlotte threw at them next, they would face it as they faced everything now, as partners, as allies, and increasingly as two people genuinely in love. 6 months had passed since that tense dinner at Devonshire House, and autumn had settled over London, with its characteristic grey skies and golden leaves. Arabella stood in the music room of Ashbourne House, overseeing the final preparations for the musicale that would showcase Miss Sophia Blackwood's compositions. The room had been transformed, chairs arranged in elegant rows, flowers adorning every surface, and the grand pianoforte polished until it gleamed. "Your Grace, the first guests are beginning to arrive," Mrs. Thornton announced from the doorway. Arabella smoothed her gown, a creation of deep sapphire silk that brought out the colour of her eyes, and took a steadying breath. This evening represented so much more than a simple musical performance. It was a statement of her values, a demonstration of the kind of Duchess she intended to be, and a celebration of female talent in a world that too often dismissed it. William appeared at her side, resplendent in his evening attire, and offered his arm. "Are you ready?" "I am," she said, and realized with a start that she meant it. The nervous, uncertain girl who had stood at the altar 6 months ago had been transformed into a woman who knew her own worth and wielded her power with confidence and grace. The musicale was a triumph. Miss Blackwood's compositions, haunting, passionate, technically brilliant, moved the assembled guests to tears and thunderous applause. The Duchess of Devonshire declared it the finest musical evening of the season, and by the time the last guests departed, 3 different publishers had approached Miss Blackwood with offers to print her work. "Your Grace," Sophia said, her eyes bright with tears of joy, "I cannot thank you enough. You have changed my life. You have given me a future I never dared to dream of." "You did this yourself with your talent and dedication," Arabella said warmly. "I merely opened a door. You walked through it with your head held high." After the guests had departed, William found Arabella in the library, staring into the fire with a contemplative expression. He settled into the chair beside her and took her hand. "You were magnificent tonight," he said softly. "Watching you command that room, seeing the respect and admiration in everyone's eyes, I have never been more proud to call you my wife." Arabella turned to him, her heart full. "Do you know what I realized tonight, William? I realized that I am happy, truly, genuinely happy. 6 months ago, I thought my life was over. I thought I was sacrificing myself on the altar of duty, resigning myself to a loveless existence. But instead, I found purpose, freedom, and— She paused, gathering her courage. And love. I love you, William. Not because I should, not because it's convenient, but because you have shown me what true partnership means. You have given me wings, and then encouraged me to fly. William's grey eyes shone with emotion. He raised her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her palm. I love you too, Arabella. I fought against it at first, told myself it was merely respect and admiration. But the truth is that you have awakened something in me that I thought died with my mother. You have taught me that love doesn't have to be a source of pain, that it can be a source of strength and joy. You have made me whole again. He pulled her into his arms, and they sat together in the firelight, two people who had found in each other something neither had been looking for, but both desperately needed. The peace of that moment was interrupted the next morning by an urgent message from Lady Beatrice. Arabella read it with growing alarm. My dear William and Arabella, I must warn you that Lady Charlotte Pemberton has been spreading a particularly vicious rumour. She is claiming that Arabella's patronage of Miss Blackwood is merely a cover for an inappropriate friendship, suggesting that there is something unnatural about two young women spending so much time together. The insinuation is both disgusting and dangerous, as you well know. Charlotte is also claiming that William's marriage to Arabella was motivated not by honour, but by some secret scandal that has yet to come to light. She suggests that Arabella was already compromised before the wedding at St. George's, and that William married her to prevent an even greater disgrace. These lies are gaining traction among certain circles, particularly those who resent your influence and success. I thought you should be aware, so that you can address them before they spread further. With love and concern, Aunt Beatrice Arabella felt sick. Charlotte's malice knew no bounds. She was willing to destroy reputations, to spread the vilest lies, simply because she could not bear to see Arabella happy and successful. William's face was thunderous as he read the letter. This has gone too far. Charlotte has crossed a line from mere gossip into outright slander. I will not allow her to continue attacking you with impunity. What can we do? Arabella asked. If we confront her directly, it will only give the rumors more attention. If we ignore them, they may spread unchecked. We expose her, William said grimly. We reveal her for what she truly is, a bitter, vindictive woman whose jealousy has driven her to cruelty, and I know exactly how to do it. Over the next week, William put his plan into motion with the precision of a military campaign. He called in favours from influential friends, gathered evidence of Charlotte's past indiscretions and malicious behaviour, and prepared to strike at the heart of her social standing. The opportunity came at the Countess of Jersey's ball, one of the most prestigious events of the season. Charlotte was there, holding court as usual, her beautiful face arranged in an expression of false sympathy as she whispered her poison to anyone who would listen. William and Arabella arrived late, making a dramatic entrance that drew every eye in the ballroom. Arabella wore the Ashbourne diamonds and a gown of midnight blue that made her look like a queen. William's hand was firm and possessive on her arm as they descended the stairs. The Countess of Jersey herself approached them, her expression troubled. Your Grace, Duchess, I am glad you are here. There have been some unfortunate rumours circulating this evening. I wanted you to know that I give them no credence whatsoever. Thank you, Lady Jersey, William said. In fact, I am glad to have this opportunity to address those rumours publicly. May I have your permission to speak to your guests? Lady Jersey looked surprised but intrigued. Of course, Your Grace. William moved to the centre of the ballroom, his commanding presence drawing immediate attention. The orchestra fell silent, and conversations died away as everyone turned to face him. "Ladies and gentlemen," William began, his voice carrying clearly through the vast space, "I have become aware that certain malicious rumors have been circulating about my wife, the Duchess of Ashbourne. These rumors question her character, her motivations, and the circumstances of our marriage. I am here tonight to address them directly." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. This was unprecedented. A duke publicly defending his wife's honor before the entire ton. "The truth," William continued, "is quite simple. I married Arabella because I recognized in her qualities that I value above all others: integrity, intelligence, courage, and compassion. She was the victim of a scoundrel's deception, and I considered it both my duty and my privilege to offer her my protection. In the months since our marriage, she has exceeded every expectation. She has managed my household with skill and grace. She has used her position to support worthy causes and talented individuals, and she has conducted herself with a dignity that puts many of her critics to shame." He paused, his grey eyes scanning the crowd until they found Charlotte, who had gone pale. "There are those who cannot bear to see others succeed, who find joy only in tearing down what they themselves cannot achieve. These people spread lies and innuendo because they have nothing of substance to offer. They are to be pitied, not heeded." "Your Grace," Charlotte's voice rang out, shrill with desperation, "you cannot possibly believe that I—" "Lady Charlotte," William interrupted, his voice cold as winter, "I have in my possession sworn statements from 3 different servants who were present when you deliberately spread false rumors about my wife. I have letters in your own hand to various members of society filled with lies and malicious speculation. I have evidence of your attempts to manipulate and deceive, to destroy reputations for your own amusement. If you continue on this path, I will not hesitate to make all of this evidence public. Your social standing, such as it is, will be utterly destroyed." The silence in the ballroom was absolute. Charlotte stood frozen, her beautiful face twisted with rage and humiliation. She had been exposed before the entire ton, her machinations laid bare for all to see. "Furthermore," William continued, turning back to address the crowd, "I want to make something perfectly clear. My wife is under my protection, and anyone who speaks against her speaks against me. Anyone who spreads rumors about the Duchess of Ashbourne will find themselves excluded from my homes, my patronage, and my friendship. I trust I make myself understood." The message was unmistakable. To attack Arabella was to make an enemy of one of the most powerful men in England. The ton, ever pragmatic, would choose the Duke's favour over Charlotte's gossip every time. Lady Jersey began to applaud, and soon the entire ballroom joined in. It was a public endorsement of Arabella, a collective rejection of Charlotte's poison. Arabella felt tears prick her eyes as she watched her husband, this man who had once seemed so cold and distant, defend her with such passion and conviction. Charlotte, seeing that she had lost, fled the ballroom in disgrace. She would never recover from this public humiliation. By morning, she would be persona non grata in every fashionable drawing room in London. As the ball resumed and guests crowded around to offer their support and congratulations, Edmund appeared at their side, his face alight with admiration. "William, that was magnificent. I've never seen you so passionate about anything. Arabella, you have worked a miracle. You have turned my stoic cousin into a romantic hero." William smiled, an expression that transformed his usually stern features. "Arabella is worth fighting for. I only wish I had realized it sooner." The weeks that followed brought a profound sense of peace and contentment. With Charlotte's influence destroyed, the rumors died away, replaced by genuine admiration for the Duchess of Ashbourne and her works. Arabella's patronage of Miss Blackwood had inspired other society ladies to support female artists and reformers, creating a small but growing movement for change. Thomas wrote from Scotland with news that he had been sober and gambling-free for 6 months, that he was learning estate management and finding genuine satisfaction in honest work. Her parents had settled comfortably into their new home. The shadow of debt and disgrace finally lifted from their shoulders. But the greatest change was in Arabella's marriage. What had begun as a convenient arrangement had blossomed into genuine love and partnership. William was no longer the distant, guarded man she had married. He laughed more freely, sought out her company not from duty but from desire, and spoke openly about his feelings and hopes for their future. One evening in early December, as they sat together in the library at Ashbourne Park, they had returned to Derbyshire for the winter. William set aside his book and turned to Arabella with an expression of nervous anticipation. "I have something for you," he said, producing a small velvet box from his pocket. Arabella opened it to find a delicate gold locket, intricately engraved with intertwining vines and flowers. Inside was a miniature portrait of William on one side and space for another portrait on the other. "I thought," William said softly, "that when we have children, we could place their portrait here as well. A family, Arabella. Not just a dynasty or a duty, but a real family built on love and respect and partnership." Arabella's eyes filled with tears. "William, it's beautiful. And yes, I want that too. I want to build a life with you, to raise children who know they are loved, to create something lasting and meaningful." He fastened the locket around her neck, his fingers lingering on her skin. "I never thought I could be this happy," he admitted. "I thought I had resigned myself to a life of duty and isolation. But you, Arabella, you have shown me that life can be so much more. You have given me hope and joy and love. You have made me believe in the future again. And you have given me freedom," Arabella said, taking his face in her hands. "Freedom to be myself, to pursue my passions, to matter. You saw value in me when I could barely see it in myself. You have made me strong." They kissed, a long, tender kiss that spoke of love and promise, and the future they would build together. When they finally pulled apart, William rested his forehead against hers. "Do you remember what you said to me the day I proposed?" he asked. "You asked why I would help you, what you could possibly offer me. I told you that I saw value where others saw only difficulty. But the truth, Arabella, is that I saw you. I saw your strength and your grace and your goodness, and I knew that you were exactly what I needed, even if I didn't understand it at the time. We saved each other," Arabella said softly. "You rescued me from a fraudulent marriage, and I rescued you from a life half-lived. We are both better for having found each other." As winter settled over Derbyshire, blanketing Ashbourne Park in snow, Arabella reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought her to this moment. She had stood at an altar as a sacrificial bride, prepared to surrender her dreams for duty. She had been humiliated before all of London, her reputation shredded by scandal and malice. She had married a stranger out of necessity, with no expectation of happiness or love. But from those ashes, something beautiful had grown. She had discovered her own strength, had learned to wield power with grace and purpose, had found in William a partner who valued her mind as much as her beauty, who encouraged her ambitions rather than stifling them. She was no longer the frightened girl who had walked down the aisle at St. George's Church. She was the Duchess of Ashbourne, a woman of influence and purpose, beloved by her husband and respected by society. She had bloomed where she was planted, transforming a marriage of convenience into a love story for the ages. And as she stood at the window of Ashbourne Park, watching the snow fall over the estate that was now her home, William's arms wrapped around her from behind, she knew with absolute certainty that she had found exactly where she belonged. The scandal that had threatened to destroy her had instead become the catalyst for her greatest happiness. The Duke, who had defied the ton to choose her, had become the love of her life, and the future that had once seemed so bleak now stretched before her, bright with possibility and promise. She had been offered up as a sacrifice, but she had emerged as a victor. She had been judged and found wanting by those who did not matter, but she had been chosen and cherished by the one who did. And in the end, that made all the difference. Thank you for listening to this story. If you enjoyed it, please don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments from which part of the world you're listening. I love hearing from you, and your support means everything. Until next time, remember that sometimes the most unexpected paths lead to the most extraordinary destinations.